Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all doing okay. So this is a new video, a continuation of the series of videos that I've been releasing to cover to go over the fundamentals of programming using the JavaScript programming language. In the previous videos, we wrapped up our exploration of conditionals, and in this video we will be transitioning to a new and another very interesting topic or concept of programming, which is loops. Okay, so what are loops? Well, a loop in regular human language, if you think of it, is just like doing something over and over again, right? So if we think about it, like if you would Google a definition of a loop, more or less you'd get a definition where it says like you're performing a certain action or doing something over and over again. And it's basically the same thing in programming. Loops gives us the ability to run a certain block of code over and over again. We can have it running forever, or in most cases, we have it a loop running, for example, X number of times. And the way we determine how many times a loop should run is by using conditions, right? So it's obviously very important. If you guys haven't, if you guys don't know what conditions are, you should probably check out the previous sections or previous videos that in which we expanded in depth on conditions and how you do them and how you can use them to make decisions, right? And all that cool stuff. But so in this video, we will be focusing on the three main types of loops. Just keep in mind that there are a couple other ones out there, but I think going over these three for now will suffice. And in reality, they all fundamentally do the same thing. It's just different ways of defining them. But so we will be going over in this video the while loop, the do while loop, and the for loop. Okay. So again, like I said, we use loops in programming. We use loops in programming to repeat a certain block of code X number of times, right? It could be one, it could be two. It could be as much times as we want. It could even be infinitely, right? And we usually call a loop that never ends an infinite loop. But so with that being said, let's get into some examples. And the first one we will be looking at is the while loop. Okay, so to start defining a while loop, we use the while keyword. Okay, and we have a set of parentheses here, a pair of parentheses, and in this parentheses, just as as it was with the if statement, this is where we would place our condition, right? After that, we declare the body of the loop or the while loop, and the way we do that is by using, surprise, surprise, curly braces. So this is the basic structure of a while loop. Now, of course, in condition, this is where we would place some comparison that would determine when the loop should end, right? So remember that a while loop, or with loops in general, they will run whatever code is specified in the body of the loop over and over again, so long as a specified or given condition is being satisfied. So when I talk about a condition in the context of loops, it's basically a comparison that will resolve to either true or false. So if the comparison is continuing to resolve to true, then the loop will keep on running over and over again. And if it does resolve to false at some point, then the loop will terminate, right? So let's add a condition in this while loop. So to do that, I will be declaring a variable, and I'm going to call this variable I for simplicity, and I'll initialize it with 0, okay? So now in the condition is where we will actually type the code or the statement that will determine when the loop should terminate. And of course, we do this by doing comparisons, right? So let's say, for example, we want this loop to run 3 times, right? So we want 3 iterations, right? So to do that, what we do is we'd say while I is less than 0, and then in the body of the while loop, we could place just about any code we want or any type of logic we want. But in this case, let's just keep it simple and just console.log. Let's say hello from while loop. Whoops. From while loop. Okay? And so this comparison is actually wrong. So we want it to run 3 times, so this should be set to 3. So keep in mind that the comparison that you specify within a while loop can be as basically complex as you want it to be or simple as you want it to be. Really just keep in mind that if you want your loop to end at some point, and not just have it running forever and ever, then just make sure that the comparison that you have specified in the while loop will at some point resolve the true. So in this example, if I run this code, we should see, or you might be expecting to see hello world from while loop output into the console a total of 3 times, right? But that's actually not the case. This is, if we were to run this code right now, and I'm not going to run it because if I do, it will crash my browser window over here. Because this is an example where this loop will be running forever and ever and ever and ever, because the comparison that we are specifying here is always going to resolve the true, because I, which has a value of 0, is always less than 3, right? Because 0 is always going to be less than 3. So the way this, if we execute this, what will happen is when we get to the point of this while loop, we will check the condition first. So we always, with the while loop, check the condition first, the comparison that is being made. If it's true, then we execute the body of the while loop, right? And then we check the condition again. If it's true, we execute the body of the while loop again, and so on and so on and so on. But in our example, like I said, the comparison that we're doing here is always going to resolve true. So basically what we need is some way to make this comparison resolve false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new line here, and it's going to look like this: I plus equals 1. So in the context of while loop, the variable I that I defined up here, we usually refer to it as a iterator variable. And why we call it that is because this iterator variable is a variable that we use to determine how many iterations the loop should run for before it ends. And how we do that is by incrementing the value of I for each iteration. So let's look at this again, right? And the condition will be executed first. Is 0 less than 3? Yes. So we're going to console.log hello from while loop. And then what we're going to do here is, so if you guys don't remember what this symbol is, this is the add an assignment operator, which we previously covered in the operators video. But this is essentially the same as saying I is equal to I plus 1. So basically all we're doing here is each time we loop, we will be incrementing the I variable by 1. So for the first one, we're going to console.log hello world, or just hello from while loop, and then we will increment the I variable by 1. So at this point, it will no longer be 0. I will now have the value of 1. So is 1 less than 3? Yes, it's still less than 3. So we're going to console.log again, and then we're going to increment the I variable again. In this case, I will now be 2. So we go do the comparison again. Is 2 less than 3? it's still less than 3, so we cancel that log again, and then we increment again, right? So we're incrementing I again. So now I will be equal to 3. So when we do our comparison, is 3 less than 3? No, it's not less than 3. It's equal to 3. So the comparison will evaluate the false, and the body of the while loop will no longer be executed. So we will terminate this loop. So let's run this example, and if we run this example, we should see hello from while loop outputted 3 times to the console. So let's run it, and there we go. Hello from while loop. Okay, so this is the first type of while loop, or that we'll be covering. So again, this is the while loop. The important things to keep in mind about the while loop is that the condition is evaluated first before executing the body of the while loop, right? So if the condition is true, the body will be executed, and it will be executed repeatedly until the condition is false, at which point the loop will just terminate, right? And execution will continue outside of the while loop to any other code that you have defined following the while loop. So this is an example of how in this example, it's not really practical, but we're just basically outputting hello from while loop to the console. But like I said, you could put just about any type of logic you want in a while loop, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for these examples. Okay, so let's now move on to the second type of loop, which is the do while loop. So let me just type it out. So we start with the do keyword. Then the difference here between the while loop and the do while loop is that with the do while loop, the body of the loop, it comes before the actual condition. So if we compare, and I'm missing the while keyword here. Okay. So of course, the way we define the structure of these two loops are different, but with the do while loop, the fundamental difference here is that, as you can see with the while loop, the condition comes before the body of the loop. But with the do while loop, you can see that the body comes before the actual condition. So what does this mean? Well, this means that it is guaranteed that this loop will run at least once regardless of the condition. So let me actually demonstrate that. So we're going to be doing the same thing. We're just going to be console logging to the, okay? So instead of while loop, we're going to say hello from do while loop. And to show you this, I'm going to specify the condition here to just be false. So if we run this, like I said, the do while loop is doing the comparison after the body of the after the body of the loop. So we should still expect, even though the comparison is false, we should still expect to see hello from do while loop outputted to the console once. So if I run this code, you can see that we get hello from do while loop just once. So these other ones are from the previous loop. So maybe I can just comment this out for now so it doesn't confuse us. So now you can see we get hello from do while loop outputted once, even though our comparison is false. So this is an important thing to note about the do while loop. Yes, the structure is different. So you can see we've introduced this new keyword, do. It's still fundamentally doing the same thing, right? Iterating certain piece of code over and over, given a certain comparison results to true. The little difference is that the body is guaranteed to be executed at least once, because the condition or the comparison that we are making is coming after the declaration of the body. Okay, But let's replicate the same example that we've been looking at up here, where we are outputting this 3 times, right? So we should expect to see hello from do while loop outputted to the console a total of 3 times. So let's do that. So let's declare a new iterator variable up here, x equals to 0, and let's also let's also increment x by 1 each time for each iteration. So plus equals, or let me just do it the expanded way, I plus 1. And then we're going to be doing the same comparison like this, just so that we can keep it consistent for this, for these examples, okay? So again, we're doing the same comparison as the previous example, so we should expect to see hello from do while loop outputted 3 times to the console. So let's run this. Oh, and I actually need to say, make sure I'm using the right variable. So if I run this, you can see we get hello from do while loop outputted 3 times to the console, right? So we're basically doing the same thing as with the previous example. So we declared our iterator variable and initialized it to 0, and then for each time the body of the loop is executed, we increment this x variable by 1, right? So it will go for the first run, it will start at 0, so x will be equal to 0. For the second run, x will have been incremented by 1, so its value will now be 1. For the third iteration, x will have been incremented again by 1, so its value will be 2. And then for the third, not third, but the fourth go around, x will have a value of 3, right? And of course, at this point, 3 will no longer be less than 3. So all further iterations will be terminated. So basically, the while loop will stop running. Okay? So that's the while loop. We're still doing the same thing. We're still repeating whatever code is specified in the body of the loop over and over again until, as long as a condition is true. Remember, the only key difference here is that the do while loop is guaranteed to be, anything within the body of the do while loop is guaranteed to be executed at least once, because the condition comparison that we're making is coming after the body. Okay? Okay, so we've looked at the do while loop, we've looked at the while loop. Now let's get into the last one that I want to go over in this video, and this is, of course, the for loop. Okay, so again, as you'll see, the structure here is different, but they all fundamentally do the same thing, right? Repeating stuff over and over again. So let me just start. So we begin by typing the for keyword. Again, we have parentheses, and then, of course, we have the body of the loop, which is denoted by these curly braces, right? Now, in the parentheses here is composed of 3 statements, right? The first part is what people usually refer to as the initialization statement. The second part is usually, is the condition, where the condition statement would go. And then the third statement is usually where the increment statement would go. Okay, and note that each of these statements are separated by semicolons. So let's break this down. If you look at the previous examples, right, with the do while loop and the while loop, let me uncomment this one so we can add it back. you'll notice that for each one of these loops, we have an initialization component. It has a condition and a increment component, right? So the initialization, for example, in the while loop is this part up here where we're initializing the iterative variable to 0. The condition is I less than 3, so this portion over here, this comparison that we're making. And then the increment statement is this part over here, right? So where we are incrementing the iterative variable by 1 each time the loop is executed. Okay, so again, the initialization, this is where you typically define code, for this portion over here, any code you define here will be executed once before the first iteration. So this is usually where we define the iterative variable, right? So how does that look like? It looks exactly like this, right? So in this case, I'm going to use a different variable. I'm going to use y. So let y equals to 0, right? So the same type of initialization that we've been doing for the do while loop and the while loop, we do for the for loop, but instead of doing it outside of the loop, we are doing everything in the parentheses, right? And then following comes the condition. So we want to output something to the console 3 times, so we're going to be using the same condition. So we just need to make sure we're using the right variable. So y less than 3. And then, of course, the increment part. This is usually the expression that increments the iterative variable. So we want to increment y each time the loop runs or repeats, right? And we want to increment it by 1. So we just do y equals 2y plus 1. And let's console.log hello from for loop. So if we run this, we should see this outputted to the console a total of 3 times. So let's give this a try. And we do get that. So hello from for loop outputted to the console a total of 3 times, right? So this one has, again, a different structure to it as compared to the previous ones. We basically are doing everything in this parentheses here. So we are doing the initialization, right, of the iterative variable. We are doing our comparison and or increment expression, all in the parentheses of the for loop. And remember, each one of these statements are separated by a semicolon, right? So that is the for loop, right? So as you can see, we use loops to run a piece of code over and over and over again, so long as a comparison is being evaluated to true. And once that comparison is no longer true, then we simply exit out of the loop, right? So let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to go over for loops. No, I think that's just about it. So like I said, these aren't the only 3 types of loops that we have in JavaScript. There's a couple of other ones, but I think like these 3 are probably like the most used ones and probably like the ones that you're going to be using most of the times, right? The while loop, the do while loop, and the for loop. So just a quick recap before I end this video. With the while loop, the condition is evaluated first before executing the body of the loop, right? And it will continue to be executed, the body of the while loop will continue to be executed so long as the comparison is being resolved to true. So again, if we want an infinite loop, we could do something like this, right? We'd have a comparison that will always resolve to true, and whatever code we want we would place in the body of this while loop, and we can expect this code to be executed infinitely, right? Because our comparison will always be resolving to true, because of course in this example I'm using the Boolean value true, right? So true is always true. So this stuff, whatever we'd have in here, would be executed repeatedly forever and ever. There are like rare use cases of having an infinite loop, and there are sometimes that it can be useful. But in most cases, you will be working with loops that will run X number of times, right? As we've been seeing in these examples, right? So that's the while loop. And then now, secondly, we have the do while loop. And again, the do while loop, the difference here is that unlike with the while loop, the do while loop, the body comes before the condition. So this, again, guarantees that the body of the do while loop will run at least once, regardless if the condition results to false. And then lastly, we went over the for loop. In the for loop, we define all of the three statements that really allow us to have like this granular control over loops in the parentheses, right? So we have the initialization portion, right, which we used to define our iterative variable, which we then, remember, the iterative variable we use in the next statement as part of the comparison or condition, which ultimately determines when this loop will terminate, if it should terminate. And then the third statement, we essentially just increment our incrementer variable for each time this loop is repeated, right? So the important thing to note here is that the initialization portion of the for loop, any code that we define here will only be executed once, and that's before the first iteration, right? So before the first time this loop is actually executed. So that is why we initialize our iterative variable over here. But yeah, so again, that's loops in a nutshell, right? They give us the ability to execute blocks of code over and over again. We can have it repeating forever and ever and ever. Or in most cases, we'd want it to repeat X number of times, and we usually have it repeat X number of times by specifying some comparison or condition that will at some point evaluate to false. So yeah, that's loops. As always, for this video, you will be able, I will, in the description of the video, I will also include the article or post for this video. So if you guys prefer reading, you can go over this as well. I also have like some examples in here, some additional examples. So if you, whichever way you guys prefer learning, right? If it's watching the videos or reading or a combination of both, right? It's completely up to you, but I will leave a link to the post in the description of the video. But that's it for now. We're almost at the end of this series of videos, because the next thing that we'll be covering will be the final thing for now before we move on to some more advanced topics. And so the next concept that we will be going over is functions, yet another very interesting and core building block of programming. So I hope you guys look forward to that video. But yeah, that's about it for now. So thank you guys again for tuning back in. And I look forward to see you guys in the next video.